Hello everyone. Do you know how to steer the game towards a good knight versus bad bishop position? It's Grandmaster Max Illingworth here, and in this video we're going to see a really great game from this year's Pro Chess League. I think of all the games I've seen in the Taimanov Sicilian, this one would have to be one of the nicest, I think, in terms of smoothness of Black's positional execution. Now, this was a game played between Georgina from China, rated around 2400, playing as white against Raymond Song, playing as black. So the opening went as follows. It was e4, c5. So for those who know the Taimanov move order, then you'll know these moves already. e6, open Sicilian with d4, takes, knight c6, knight c3, and now queen to c7 is a move that characterizes a Taimanov. It's true, you could also start with a6. And the point of black's setup compared to, let's say, the Scheveningen pawn structure is that black keeps the option of putting the bishop on b4 in some lines. So, for example, if white were to, say, play bishop e3 and play the English attack, which is one of the more critical lines in general in the Sicilian defense, then in this case you have a choice of whether to put the bishop on b4 or whether to put on the Scheveningen square of e7 and play for the b5, b4 pawn push instead. Well, that is a topic for another video, because in the game, rather than playing this or playing the other main line of kingside castling, white played the move g3, the Fianchetto variation, and I used to think this was actually quite a good try for an advantage for white, but it turns out that basically this variation leads to a line where the engine will say that white is a lot better, but black's position is actually quite good. And we'll kind of get to see that in the game, actually. So black played knight d4, which, in my opinion, is probably the only move that equalizes here. So queen takes d4. Bishop c5 was played. And okay, does white have to move the queen away in this position? Turns out you don't have to yet, because white has bishop f4. And after d6, so the exchange of queens would be in white's favour, where he can exploit the weak dark squares in black's camp. So d6 was played. And after queen d2, white's plan is pretty simple, that he wants to pile up against the weak d6 pawn. But we can deal with that with a nice prophylactic move here, where black played the move h6, just making sure that when we do play e5, that white doesn't have bishop g5 and the domination of the d5 square that arises from the exchange of bishop for knight, which fits well our theme of good knight versus bad bishop, that naturally the way to get such a position is to make a favourable exchange of our bishop for their knight. So after bishop e3, black played bishop to e6, just covering the d5 square. And after takes and takes, white played it quite ambitiously in the game, where she played the move f4. Before we get to that, though, I want to show you the position that the computers misevaluate. It arises after knight d5. Okay, which way should we take back on d5 in this position? Okay, not a difficult question. Black plays bishop takes d5, because if you took with the knight instead, you'd lose a key tempo, having to move the bishop, and white would get the pawn to d6 and free his bishop, which is not something that we want to allow. So therefore, queen d6 follows to blockade the pawn. And now if white plays sort of normal moves like rook e1, then the engine will say white is much better after c4 or after a4. And at one point I actually believed this assessment to be true. But then when I looked at the position deeper, I kind of realized it's actually very hard for white to kind of open up the position in a good way. Because let's say you play knight d7, for example. Well, black has this quite clear plan of playing moves like rook e8, and if one is more ambitious, to go for f5 and e4. And it's very hard for white to kind of open up the queen side in his favour. He's probably left a bit too late to play f4 as well, which might just weaken his king more than anything else. In the meantime, the bishop is kind of stuck behind his passed pawn. That is blockaded in any case. And if white plays c4, then you could even consider a move like a5 and just completely tie up the board. And in that case, I don't really see a way through for white if black just sort of continues to play solidly as such. And maybe even black can try to press if white is not careful. So it's a good example of how you can't always believe the engine, and I think that's all the more true nowadays with both Stockfish and AlphaZero. Well, not AlphaZero, but Leela Chess Zero out there to analyze with. That means it's all the more reason to kind of check and verify that the evaluation of position is in fact correct and not a position where the machine doesn't know what's going on. So anyway, white played the move f4 instead. And perhaps it's not too late for white to still play knight to d5. Actually, I have a fun puzzle for you. If white plays queen d6, how do you think black should deal with the offer to trade queens in this position? Now, your idea might have been to play queen takes d6 and sort of let white's rook get very active. But black has this really neat idea of actually playing queen a5 and sacking the pawn. The point is that you don't really want to play f takes e5 anyway, because of the fact that you double your pawns for one thing. And if queen takes e5, then this sort of falls into black's trap after rook e8, where black threatens not just the bishop g4 discovered attack, but also bishop to c4. And you can't get out of it with queen d6, because then rook d8 follows, and white will have to give up material as the queen is trapped in this position. So with that we can sort of see a nice little trap, which white didn't fall for in the game. She played f5 instead. But black still kind of got the kind of position he wanted after bishop c4 and rook fe1. Maybe rook a8 first was slightly more precise. But actually I think b5 is a pretty good move as well in this position. And there's a sort of point, I think, when a trend of game starts to really turn against white, where I think white might only be a little bit worse if you play queen d6 and sort of try to exchange some pieces and play down the d file. Instead, white went for knight d5, and we sort of get this structure like what we saw before, after takes, and queen d6. The difference, though, is that white's pawn is now on f5, meaning the position is very closed for the black knight. And black has also already gained some ground on the queen side and has this space advantage there. So all this adds up to a position that, from the computer's perspective, is only slightly worse for white. But I think on a practical level, black already has a clear advantage. So if you are worried about the idea of white playing for some g4, h4, and g5, I think with the knight covering on f6, this is just not going to be fast enough, and black will still be able to play the plan they did in the game. So my suggestion for black would probably be to play c4. For white would be to play c4. At least try and open up the board a little bit for the bishops. Obviously it's not a permanent pawn sacrifice, as white can play rook c1 if bc4 to get his pawn back. Although black would still play the same way he did in the game, of course. Whereas it's a more strategic position. It does give black that leeway to do as he pleases to some extent. So after white's queen e2, well, it's over given that black will play rook e8. And here white played b3 to try and stop c4. And what do you think is the move that black played to improve his position here? So pause the video and come back here when you've made your decision. So in the game, black played e4, which I think is a pretty good move, and it clears a square for the black pieces and also the passed pawn. Kind of really gums up white's pieces. It's not so easy to round it up, as we'll see in the game. It turns out it might be even stronger to start with c4, saying that, okay, you didn't really prevent c4 after all. And the point is that after b takes c4 and queen c5, and king to h1, we can actually play a very interesting pawn sacrifice with e4. again killing their bishop. And the point is that either we'll take c4 and the d5 pawn will be very weak, or after c takes, then we'll just be able to gang up on the weak white pawns on the queen side, knowing that white's bishop is not really able to join the defense easily. So I think this might be technically even better, but the move e4 also keeps a nice advantage. And after c4, probably here I would just be a bit patient as black and just play a move like rook b8, with the idea of kind of opening up that b file at a good moment when white's a bit distracted on the king side and in the center. Instead, black played rook e5, which it worked out very well in the game because white responded a bit too passively with the move queen f1. It turns out that a good question you can often ask in chess is, can we simply ignore the opponent's threat or supposed threat? And it turns out white could have played the move queen e3 here. And the point is that if black plays, say, rook e8, then white will have time to defend this pawn and I guess keep a more or less holdable position. But if you play rook f5, then after bishop e4, it turns out that there isn't really a great way to use a possible pin on the e file, where rook e8 may just allow white to take on f5 and get two rooks for a queen. But if rook e5, then white has a nice tactic. If you haven't seen it yet, it's probably a good time to pause the video and find it. So white has the move bishop h7, discovering the attack on the rook and winning the exchange. So obviously this wouldn't be in black's best interests, and well, in principle it's better to keep these pawns on the board, since A, it's a pass pawn for black, and also to trade a pawns kind of helps the bishop get more active, as we saw. So after white's queen f1 instead, we had rook a to e8, and here white made what I'd say is a decisive mistake with rook e3. Okay, she wanted to stop the e-pawn advancing, which is somewhat natural, but the move that white had to find here, if you want to challenge yourself, you can pause the video and see if you can find this move. But the move for white here was queen to f4, with the idea of just sort of defending this pawn and eyeing the pawn on e4. And also if black plays some move like queen d7, then white can go g4, and while black is still better, and for example, he can consider even taking and try and grab a pawn on the queen side. But at least white will get some counterplay with his pawns, and it's no longer a sort of one-sided battle, as we'll see in the game. So speaking of white's move rook e3, what do you think black played in reply in this position? So the disadvantage of rook e3 is it allows black to gain a vital tempo to seize the initiative. And so black played the move knight g4, kicking the rook away. And possibly what white might have overlooked in her initial calculation is that if you play h3, black has to move knight f2. Let's show it on the board after h3 and knight f2. The point of black's play is that you can simply play rook takes f5, where if you haven't seen it already, then rook e3 would not be a sufficient move for white, as after, say, takes and takes, black can play this tactic knight h3 to win the queen and have a decisive material advantage. So instead white tried queen f3, but then black plays h5, and white's problem is that just the e-pawn is just completely cramping the white position, and that will mean that the f5 pawn is also a serious weakness. So after h3, where do you think black moved the knight in this position? So it turns out that the only winning move here is to play knight to h6, and the idea is naturally to take the pawn on f5. If white plays queen h5, I believe knight f5 and bring the knight into g3 or d4, and removing the blockading e2 rook will simply be decisive here. So white instead tried g4, trying to defend her pawns. The problem with g4 though is after takes and takes, that the white king is now very exposed, and here black found the perfect move to take advantage of this, where he played the move rook to e4, and Raymond's idea is that white is not really threatening to take on e4, because in that case, well, black can take, and it's a position where even after knight g4, the bishop, knight and queen are just clearly dominating the bishop and two rooks. Probably can even improve with some queen move, maybe queen f4 or something. Is probably even a better continuation, just to kick the bishop around. In any case, the game saw bishop to h3, defending this pawn, but as it turns out, only really temporarily, where black penetrated the white position with rook f4. Obviously, queen g3 is not a safe move because of the rook f1 discovered attack. So instead, white played queen g2. We had rook e to e4, and well, the end is nigh at this point. So after g5 and knight g4, well, black has ideas like bringing a knight or a rook into f2, which is very unpleasant. Indeed, after rook d1, black played rook to f2 in this position, using the fact that white can't take on f2. And after bishop g4, there was a nice final move. Rook takes g4, and white resigned here because if you play queen takes g4, then you run into queen h2 mate as such. So this was a really smooth game, and I think it's one reason that, especially for amateur players, but even in general, I think that you can learn quite a lot from playing through good rapid and blitz games, because in a classical game, I think white would probably put up a lot more resistance, and we wouldn't really have the opportunity to see black's ideal sort of plans and what he's aiming for. You know, that he wants to get this sort of structure and how to play it with this rook e8 and e4 plan that we saw. So I'll just delete this variation. So basically, we saw how this is a very promising position for black, and basically the way to get a good knight versus a bad bishop position is to kind of get a very stable pawn structure where it's somewhat locked up, but also where it's very hard for the opponent to open it in their favour. And then our knight can sort of run rings around the bishop. So I hope you found this video really enjoyable. I'd love to hear your comments, if you have any questions or any feedback on this video. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.